Hi. Just wait a couple of moments for people to join. Thank you for joining, guys. I'm going to be sharing some tips with you, but I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds to see if anyone else joins in, and then I will introduce myself. But I hope you're all okay. I hope you're having a nice day. We're going to be having a good chat on how to worry less. We could definitely all do with a bit more of that, couldn't we? A bit more of worrying less, not a bit more worry. So I am Anna Mathur. I am a psychotherapist, a mum of 3, and I write about mental health, especially anxiety. And it's a real honour to be chatting with one of my favourite magazines, Psychologies magazine. And I don't know if you've read it before, but if you wanted to get a copy through your door, have a look at the link in their bio for their recent offers that they have on at the moment. It's completely packed full of tips and thoughts and insights and really great meaty lengthy articles on lots of different topics that will be really helpful for you. Hi, so welcome guys. Feel free to comment along the way in the hopes that I might be able to answer a couple of questions, but I'm just going to be giving you some tips on how to worry less. I think it would be really helpful initially. I get asked quite often, what's the difference between worry and anxiety? And I think often when we think about worry, we're actually also thinking about anxiety because it seems like there's so much overlap. But just to simplify so that we're on the same page, worry is often that kind of it's a very activating feeling. So let me give you an example. If I was worried about being late for a doctor's appointment, I might then try and leave earlier. I might plan a little ahead the night before. I might get some of the kids' stuff ready. And it's kind of quite a motivating. Worry is quite motivating, isn't it? And then once I've made that doctor's appointment, that worry then subsides. Now, I think the worry that often causes a problem for us is the worry that takes up so much headspace and isn't necessarily attached to something that we can rationally do something about. That's when worry kind of verges into anxiety, and it can end up just kind of taking up so much headspace. It can end up impacting our sleep. It can end up really taking away our enjoyment of a situation when actually we're just so worried about what could go wrong. And that's when it kind of veers into anxiety. And this is the kind of worry that we're going to talk about today, because actually that's the kind of worry that takes up too much space and often means that we can't enjoy a moment as much. Like if I'm worried about something happening to one of my kids, that's where my mind is. My mind has gone ahead into all of these what ifs, what if this, what if that. And then I'm taken away from the present moment. And I think that's the tricky thing about worry and anxiety, isn't it? And also when it's impacting our sleep, because when we start to feel anxious, we slip into this kind of fight or flight physiological response, and we're like really heightened and we become really hypervigilant, and we often then our heart rate increases when we start kind of ruminating over the things that could go wrong and fears that we might have around a certain situation. I'm going to give you some examples as well. And it's a physiological thing as well. So when we have more cortisol and adrenaline, which is what happens when we're anxious and like really ruminating and worried, our body is learning that we're at threat. And often if you think about the caveman, he was often at physical threat. So imagine that the caveman is sitting down in his cave. He's gone hunting. He's got some great meat. They're eating around the fire pit in the cave. And suddenly he hears the roar of a bear, and his whole body and his whole kind of physiological system is fired up. Sometimes anxiety feels like you've literally down like 10 espressos in a row, doesn't it? And I can actually feel it now because I'm talking so fast and so animated, and I can feel my body has that response as well. So that caveman is literally, he's fired on all cylinders so that he can fight for his life and defend his family against an attack of the bear. But the issue is that so often what is happening in our body is that same firing up, but we're not at physical threat. It's often a thought or a feeling or a fear or a circumstance that has triggered a fear in our mind. So we're having a very physical response to what is often a thought or a fear. And this is what we're going to be looking at, because that is what takes over, isn't it? And when we're all fired up, we can't rest very well. We can get really fidgety and kind of just really on edge, and our body is less likely to give into sleep, because sleep is kind of it's a relaxed state, right? We have to feel safe to sleep. And if we're full of adrenaline and we're fired up, our sleep is going to be negatively impacted, which then fuels everything else as well, doesn't it? Because it's a lot harder to kind of rationalize thoughts and calm our body down and our minds down when we're tired. So that's why it's so important to get some really good tips and things to take control. Now, we've gone through massive time of uncertainty and still are, in a way, going through a massive kind of collective time of uncertainty. So anxiety for so many of us has just it's just rocketed, hasn't it? Because we don't know what's around the corner. We don't know how certain things are going to impact us. Some people are really, challenged with kind of financial challenges that are coming out of the pandemic, and relational challenges and social challenges. So there's just been so much uncertainty, and often uncertainty fuels worry and anxiety because it evokes fear. And if we think about all our anxious thoughts that we have, all the things that we worry about, they're fear-based, aren't there? That it's always, if we actually distill it down and peel away the layers, there's fear behind all of these things. And anxiety and that stress response we have is as a result of the fear. So what we need to do is find some tips that will help us kind of just ground those thoughts, so that we're not going to just feel so anxious, so our headspace isn't going to be so taken up. So I'm just going to come out with loads of different tips for you, and hopefully if you've got a pad, a paper and a pen, then you can jot some of these things down. But I want to encourage you always, first of all, compassion. We are not compassionate enough to ourselves. We are not kind enough to ourselves. I will tell you this, it feels hard and worrying, because it is hard and worrying. It's confusing because it is confusing. Often things are hard because they are hard, and we berate ourselves or we shame ourselves for finding something hard when actually it's hard because it's hard. And I think it can be really hard just to sit with that emotion and just trust that those emotions that come up in those times of uncertainty, when our fight or flight response is triggered, be kind to yourself. Because there's a little part of you that is like, what the heck is going on? How am I going to navigate this? How am I going to keep myself and my family safe? It's hard because it's hard. Be kind to yourself. When we shame ourselves for emotion that are actually very valid and a very normal human response to circumstance, what we do is we're more likely then to feel guilty, we're more likely then to be critical and impatient and unkind to ourselves, which then promotes fear of failure. So we end up just going on a bit of a downward spiral. So if we start with compassion, it's hard because it is hard. It just gives yourself that permission to feel what you're feeling, and then we can deal with that. Okay, often when we feel worried and anxious, it's because something feels like it's at threat. So being able to pinpoint that can be really helpful, because one way to validate emotion is to actually understand what it is that we're feeling. Because sometimes something just feels triggered in us, and we feel that fear and that anxiety, and actually just to be able to take a moment and say, what feels at threat in this moment for me? Is it my peace, my happiness? Is it my health, my security? Like, what in this moment is, what am I actually scared of? Because anxiety is fear. And I don't know if you ever did this at school, but I think it was a physics lesson. He held up this prism. It looked like a kind of, a crystal. And he showed us how this beam of white light would go into it, and then a rainbow of colour would just kind of hit the wall, and it was amazing. And I think anxiety can be like that. We can see anxiety as this one white light. We all know what it feels like. We know what happens in our minds. We know what happens in our bodies. But actually, anxiety is... we can learn something from that feeling if we just ask ourselves, what is it that I'm actually feeling? What is being activated? What am I actually fearful of? Because then that gives you an opportunity to recognise if there's a need there that needs to be met. If my happiness feels at stake, maybe I can bring in some gratitude to balance out the fear, and instead of just looking at what could go wrong, just to bring in a little bit of what is going right, not to devalue that feeling, but just to bring balance to it. If it's my security, is there someone that I can seek comfort from? Is there a way that I can ground myself? Just understanding what is feeling like it's a threat in this sense of worry and anxiety. One of my favourite mantras that I have been using for periods of worry and anxiety over this lockdown period is, I will cross that bridge if I get to it. Now, I love this, and I don't know when it came to me, but I've just found it so comforting. I will cross that bridge if I get to it. When a child comes to you and says, one of my kids came and said, "Mummy, I'm really scared that something's bad is going to happen to the cat." You know, and I could just laugh it away and say, "Don't be ridiculous. The cat is absolutely fine. They flipping love our cat." You know, I don't want to ridicule their feeling, but what I might say is, you know what, if something happens to the cat, and hopefully it won't, we can take it to the vet, you know, and we will cross that bridge if we get to it. But worrying is not going to give you anything. I think often we feel worry likes to tell us that it's giving us a sense of control. Worry is a big fibber. Anxiety likes to tell you that if you were to go down that what if road and you're to play it all out in your mind, then should it actually happen, it will be easier. Because there'll be a part of you that'll be like, I knew this was going to happen. I have emotionally prepared myself by living through it 100 times. Therefore, I feel a lot stronger. But we know full well from our life experience that no matter how much we might have worried about something and played it through in our mind, it doesn't actually give us more strength should it happen. It's just exhausted us, and we've lived through it enough as it is. And therefore, we probably have less emotional energy to give that situation. So using a little mantra like, I will cross that bridge if I get to it. And if is the really important one here, because how often have we gone through entire anxiety-provoking scenarios in our minds and they've never happened? You know, so just reminding yourself, I will cross that bridge if I get to it. If is important, because the likelihood is that you won't. But also, it's just a reminder that, guys, you have crossed so many bridges in your life that I bet you at some point, if someone had said, you are going to go through this, you are going to go through this pandemic, you are going to go through this job loss or this grief or this diagnosis, I bet you if someone had said that to you, you would have said, there is absolutely no chance I could weather that storm. There is no chance I have the capacity or the resources to go through that. And I will cross that bridge if I get to it. It's also a really empowering reminder to me that I have got this far and I have crossed bridges of loss and uncertainty and bad things happening that would at some point have felt insurmountable. So you will cross that bridge if you get to it. It's a nice little reminder. Let me have a look at my list. So often what happens is we go off down that road of overthinking. I'm going to give you an example. One night, my husband, he was working in London, and I think he'd gone out for work drinks or something. So he was going to be back, I think, at about 11:30. Being the terrible sleeper I am, I tend to wait up until he gets back because I know that I'm going to be disturbed and then I can't get to sleep. Anyway, 11:30 came. I was ringing him on his phone to find out where he was. I was texting him. No response at all. I lay there in my bed going through all of these scenarios, of which, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, he'd been murdered, and then I was then having to try and work out how I was going to pay the mortgage. Was I going to have to move in with the kids with my parents? How was I going to tell the kids what had happened to their dad? And I was literally lying in bed feeling grief, fear, loss, terror, and I was in a complete whirlwind. And then lo and behold, an hour later, he walked through the door, just meandered in. Why are you still awake? He said to me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't get a hold of you. And it's like, yeah, my phone ran out of battery. You know, so I had lived through in a small way. And this is what happens when we go down the route of worry and anxiety. We go through some of these feelings, and it's a real roller coaster of emotion. And actually, physically, we're responding, which shows the power of those feelings. You know, he just came in, most likely scenario, and rationally I knew that it was probably that his phone had run out of battery and he'd stayed for another drink, and that was the truth of it. But how much of that hour had been robbed from me? I could have been resting, but instead I was experiencing fear and grief. And this is what anxiety does. It it lies to us that it prepares us, it gives us a sense of control, when actually what it does, it just takes away any possibility of enjoyment, peace and presence. And those are the things that really make our life worth living. I could hold on to my children, and sometimes I cuddle them because I love them so much. I'm like, oh my goodness, I love you so much. And then at other times I'm holding on to them in the same way, but I'm terrified of losing them. And this is what anxiety does. It takes away from that moment of just being, just living, just being, whether it's a boring moment or a joyful one, and it turns it into something of fear. So Kelly says, your body can't tell the difference between it happening and thinking about it. Yes, this is true. And it's like with the caveman and how his fight or flight system responds to the threat, and that is exactly what's happening in that moment. And it's a lot of energy for your body to go. It's exhausting feeling worried and anxious, isn't it? It's emotionally and physically exhausting. So finding ways to halt that overthinking is so important and so helpful. And I tell people, and I do this also, to use these tips when you do not need them, so that when you do need them, they are so instinctive and familiar to you. And some really good ones are when you find yourself going down that what if, be kind to yourself. It's hard because it's hard. You're worried because something feels threatened. So compassion first, always. Okay? Validate and name that emotion, name that fear, know what it is. And then stop yourself from going off down that meandering road of the what ifs, because it's never going to be good for you. And it isn't happening. It isn't happening. And you will cross that bridge if you get to it. So some of my favourite techniques are count back from 100 in threes. And if you follow me or you read my courses or anything like that, you'll see that I always put this in because it's such a helpful one. It's a disruptive technique. You cannot, unless you are some maths whiz, and I think I find this one so good because I am not, you cannot count back from 100 in threes and create all of these imaginary scenarios in which you're getting out your crystal ball and seeing everything happening in front of your eyes and then responding physically. You can't do those things at the same time. So what it does, it interrupts that cycle of thinking, that thing that feels like a tornado and a whirlwind, and it just stops it in its tracks. So count back from 103s. Do it when you don't need it. Do it when you do not need it. Do it when you're falling asleep at night. You know, and actually that could be a really good time, because often we find that when life slows down and we go to rest, all of the thoughts and feelings that haven't had attention in the daytime come rushing to the surface. So finding good places to process those, normally just through talking, whether it's with a friend or a therapist, just making sure that you're having those conversations in which you are processing emotion. Otherwise they will come out more so in anxiety, and they will come out more so as you try and rest, which you need so much. So counting back from 103s. And the other one that I love is a breathing technique, because what that does is your sympathetic nervous system is what is responding when you are going down the what if road, when you're feeling worried and anxious. It's your nervous system response. It's there designed to save your life. Now, a breathing exercise, it's some amazing kind of physical hack. It's a biological, scientifically proven thing. What it does, it calms down that stress response in your body. It's like when you give a child a cuddle and you say, you know what, you're safe. You're safe. And that's what happens when we do a breathing exercise. And just do a really simple one. And a good straightforward one to begin with is in for 4, really deep down into your tummy, and then out for 6. So I often do these. If we had more time, I would do it with you, because honestly, if you can even just do 5 rounds of in for 4, out for 6, and the important thing is just that you're completely emptying your lungs all the way down, you'll notice that your shoulders will drop and your heart will calm, and physically you feel very different. That is the power of breathing. And there are so many other breathing exercises. Just start small, light box breathing. So that's another one where you kind of breathe your way around the square. But if you go on YouTube, and if you have a look kind of through the Psychologies website, you know, there will be different techniques there, and it's about finding something that works for you that won't make you lightheaded. I really struggled with driving anxiety. I had a lot of worry and anxiety around driving. I didn't drive for 10 years because I had so much fear, and it's stuff like breathing exercises and pausing that cycle and interrupting that cycle of fear and overthinking that mean that I drive every day now. And I will often breathe my way past a lorry, because that was a big trigger point for me on the motorway. I would have all these intrusive thoughts and I would breathe my way. Now I breathe my way past a lorry because I notice that anxiety rising up in me, and I will just do some just gentle breathing, nothing that makes you go lightheaded, just to calm that physiological response to the anxiety. Now, another tip for overthinking, which is in my Reframing Anxiety course and my book, Mind Over Mother. This one is definitely one that I made up. I've never read about this in any kind of textbook, but if you like kind of metaphors and visual stuff, this one is for you. So imagine that Friday night, tomorrow night, you are sitting on your sofa and you have just been waiting for this time to watch this episode of this program or a film that you've been dying to watch, and you get a plate of chips. And you're sitting there and you've got your favourite drink and you press play, and then the doorbell goes ding dong. And you're like, who is coming round? It's 8 o'clock. I've been waiting for this moment. And you go to the door and you open it, and there's a man there and he's got a load of mops in his arm. And he's like, hello, I would like to introduce you to the Super Splash V60. And you're like, you're thinking, I don't even need to buy a mop. I just want my chips. But you're polite. So you're like, okay, come on in. And before you know it, Mop Man is sat on your sofa explaining to you all the functions of this Super Splash model, and your whole evening has been completely overtaken. Before you know it, you've kindly offered him some chips and he's got a glass of wine. It looks like he's moved in, and you're sat there thinking, how the heck has this happened? So often with worry and anxiety, it's like a thought that pops into our mind, and there is nothing we can do to stop that. We cannot stop anxious thoughts. We cannot stop these intrusive thoughts that just pop into our mind. But what we can do is decide whether we invite them in, turn what is a black and white thought into a technicolor production in which we're completely immersed and involved in, and is changing our whole kind of physiological mental state. Or there's another option, thank goodness, is that tomorrow night you sat down with your chips and your glass of whatever, and the doorbell goes, and you go over and you open it and he's there, hello, I'm the Mop Man, I'd like to introduce you to my Super Splash V60. And you're like, thank you, that's really kind of you, I'm good for mops, but have a lovely evening. And you shut the door and off he goes. You know, and that's the great thing with anxiety, is that whilst we cannot control what comes into our minds, we can, and we do, and we can build ourselves up and flex that muscle and build that muscle so that we do have control as to how much it takes over. And it's not about completely ignoring the thought. Yes, you can say, what is that thought? Why am I thinking that? What am I actually worried about? Okay, I'm really fearful of losing someone else because I'm actually upset about the death of my nan. Okay, right, I'm going to process that another time when it's helpful. I'm going to have a chat about that. I'm going to speak to a therapist. But for now, I don't need to start going down a route of exactly how it would feel to lose one of my children, because I'm having a nice day. I'm with them. I want to be with them. You know, so it's just taking that control, and that's a muscle. And I want, again, compassion. Be kind to yourself in this, because if you're essentially retraining the way that you are addressing these thoughts, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to address our thoughts. So if one day you manage, or for the rest of the day you manage to bat off with whatever tip that you found helpful that I've given you here, you manage to bat off 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10, brilliant. You know, recognise your victory in that. That is amazing. That is one little bit of heartbreak. JCH, don't worry that you've missed the beginning. We're going to save it so you can go back and watch it from the start. You know, just celebrate your victories. If it's 1 out of 5 or 10 intrusive thoughts for the afternoon, just great. I'm glad that it's that one that hasn't given you that heartache and that re-trauma or whatever it is that it may have otherwise done so. You know, it's about claiming our headspace back, and that isn't something that's just done in one. It's something that we just take steps, and we're building a new muscle, and that takes time. I'm not going to go to the gym, lift the strongest weight and expect myself to do that, because if we set our standards really high, then we're just gonna be prey to shame and like self-criticism, aren't we? If we think, right, I'm gonna do this to all of my anxious thoughts from now on, and then we're gonna feel failure, because this is our coping mechanism. And I know this often surprises people, but anxiety is it's a coping mechanism. It gives us that sense of control. It doesn't really, but we feel like we have a sense of control because we're doing it out of a desperation to save ourselves pain should that terrible thing happen. Now, I want to give you one of my other favourite techniques, which is gratitude. So before you eye roll, I'm going to come at it in a slightly different way to what you might have seen in kind of Pinterest graphics. But gratitude, it's not about shaming yourself for finding something hard. It's not about shaming yourself for feeling overwhelmed. And I think often we're like, I shouldn't be feeling this. And we use emotional comparison. I shouldn't be finding this hard because so-and-so is going through that. So therefore I should just be pleased. Your feelings are your feelings. Someone else's broken leg does not make your stubbed toe hurt any less. Okay? If you find something overwhelming and you know that so-and-so is overwhelmed and they're going through completely different stuff to you that you deem harder, your feelings are your feelings, okay? So when we talk about gratitude, I'm not encouraging you not to feel those feelings. It's just and. So you can feel overwhelmed and grateful. And sometimes these feelings seem really conflicting. Like you can feel sad and grieving and happy. You can feel content and confused. And gratitude simply just kind of brings in, it takes our attention solely from what is going wrong and what could go wrong to what is good and going right. So it brings in that and. I remember when I was 10, we lost my sister to a brain tumour. And I remember this scene when we were rolling down, so it was summer, we were rolling down this hill, my brother and I, and we were laughing so much and we were covered in grass and we were dizzy and we were doing that thing when you walk around and you're kind of stumbling about. And in that moment, there was joy and there was laughter, but the reality of it was that we were rolling down the bank of my sister's graveyard where we buried her weeks before. And it just shows that, we can feel many things in tandem. Grief doesn't need to completely blank out joy, and the fact that you're happy about something doesn't mean that you're not also sad. We can feel many things in one go, and I think often, the worry and that anxiety, we shame ourselves for those feelings because we're like, I should be happy about this, I should be happy about that, but you can feel worried and happy. You can feel grateful and scared. So it's just gratitude just brings in a bit of balance to the feeling, and it helps us. Maybe it helps that worry feel a little bit less overwhelming when we can also bring in some stuff that's going well. My favourite technique for this is changing I've got to I get to. I've got to do the washing again. I'm fed up with doing the washing. It's constant. I'm literally sitting next to this, look, washing pile. I'm pretty sure I emptied that yesterday. I've got to do the washing. I get to do the washing. Now let me unpick this a bit. It's actually had me crying at my washing machine before. I get to do the washing. I get to do the washing in my washing machine that I'm incredibly privileged to own. It's not that's not, I am very lucky to own a washing machine. I'm very lucky to have a washing machine in a home that we live in that keeps us warm and safe and dry. I am very grateful to have children and a husband whom I love, who we can afford to buy clothes for. Because that's, again, all of these things, these are massive privileges. And just turning I've got to I get to it just brings that balance in for me. And it makes some of those mundane things just feel a little bit more life-giving. It just helps us recognise the privilege that we have in those things. So hopefully I have given you some tips. I'm just looking at my little list here. But I think my main thing is you get to wake up in the middle of the night with your baby, Salma. Yeah. And I know that it's hard. I know that it's tiring. And you can be, and this is it, waking up in the middle of the night when you're tired with your baby. It's hard and it's tiring. And sometimes it can feel quite frustrating, especially when it's like they've been awake for so long or it's so many wake ups. But actually, I get to. it can be hard and frustrating, and also it can be a life-giving privilege. So it just brings balance. It's not shaming you for saying you should not feel tired and overwhelmed by this. It's saying, yes, you feel tired and overwhelmed. And that is incredibly valid. And also it's a privilege and it's a joy in other ways too. And it just brings those two things together. So I really hope that was helpful. Again, I'm Anna Mathur. I'm on Instagram at Anna Mathur. I've written a book called Mind Over Mother, which was out in May. It's all about kind of postnatal worry and anxiety in motherhood. And I've got some courses on anxiety and people pleasing, and podcast called The Therapy Edit, which is lots of 10-minute different bits. But it's been a real privilege today to chat with you from the Psychologies magazine Instagram page, and I just want to encourage you again. I don't know the last time you got an issue, whether you get it digitally or whether you just want one in your hands. I love having a physical magazine, so if that is something you would like to gift yourself with or someone else with, then there's a link in the bio of this Instagram page that will tell you what the deals are at the moment. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me. I'm going to save this live now so that it is available for you to watch again and make some notes if you didn't get to do that, or to direct a friend if you know that they're struggling and would benefit. But thanks for joining and take care. It's been a real honour. Bye.